Hi, my name is Sarah, and today we're here to talk about my February makes. I'm going to be counting down all the things that I made in February from my least favorite to my most favorite, and I film these segments throughout the month so that all of the details will be fresh in my mind. So I won't be discussing the rankings during those segments. However, I will put up titles so that you can count down with me as we go. Now before we get to the new makes, I have a couple of alterations to share with you. The first one I want to talk about is the one that's on my dress form here. This is the Styla Patterns Galena dress. I made this back in 2021 and I actually looked it up and I only wore this dress one time in 2023 and I wore it back in January, so it's been over a year since I've worn this dress. The issue with it is that when I initially made the dress, I didn't let the hem drop. And so over time, the hem stretched out and got really uneven. And it made me never want to wear the dress because whenever I would put it on, that sloppy looking hem just reminded me of something that I might buy from Amazon or Shein. And I just thought it looked really tacky and cheap. But I do like the dress overall, and finally I decided it was time to get it out of the closet, fix the hem, or get rid of it because the way that it was, I just was not going to wear it. So while I was at it, I went ahead and also shortened the dress by about 2 inches to be a little bit more above the knee. Because I have such short legs, I think that things do look better on me when they are a little bit shorter, a little bit more proportioned to my body. So I evened out the hem by using a ruler and just measuring down from the waist seam on the skirt all the way around the hem, marking it, and then just cutting it off at the markings. And then I did a very simple single fold hem by just turning it up and stitching it with a straight stitch on my regular sewing machine with normal thread. It's a really wide skirt, so it doesn't need to stretch over your body, so that was a very quick and easy fix. And I have some before and after pictures, and I think that you'll agree with me that it just looks so much better with the hem level. It doesn't look sloppy anymore, it doesn't look cheap. And I actually wore it the other day and I got a few compliments, and I had kind of forgotten how cute this dress is and how I actually do like it. So I'm really glad that I got that fixed and back in my wardrobe because I do think that it's a nice trans-seasonal dress. I can wear it pretty much any season, maybe except for the summer because of the long sleeves. So I'm looking forward to actually getting this back out and wearing it again. The second item that I fixed was a hand-knit sweater. I can't recall the name of this pattern off the top of my head, but I will put it up on the screen. And I made this last year. And I used a Drops wool alpaca blend and I held it with a strand of mohair silk. So it's a really warm, fluffy sweater. But I never wanted to wear this because when I initially made it, I did yarn over buttonholes as the pattern suggested. And those buttonholes were just too big for the buttons. And so every time I wore it, the buttons would pop open and it was super irritating. Every time I would look down, half of my buttons would be undone. So I never wanted to wear the sweater because it was just too fiddly. I'd have to keep constantly rebuttoning the buttons. And because we're in February, I still have a substantial amount of time that I could be wearing this sweater before it gets too warm, but I needed to fix it. So I simply got out some of the leftover yarn and just closed up the buttonholes with the darning needle, made them a little bit smaller so that the buttons will stay closed and so I can button or unbutton them as I choose and they're not just popping open randomly all over the place. And I also wore this the other day, so I will insert a picture of that being worn. And I'm really happy to have this back in my closet. It's a nice classic look that will always go with so many things in my wardrobe. I know that it's going to get a ton of wear now that it's not irritating me so much. So I'm really glad I took the time to do that fix, and it was another super quick and easy one. It probably took me like 30 minutes at the most to fix the buttonholes. So now I have this back in my closet, and I know that it's going to be a staple for many years in the future. The next project that I have to share is a pair of plain vanilla socks. These are knit out of Into the World. It's their MCN based sock yarn. It took me 7 days from start to finish, and I bought this yarn several years ago at a festival, so I don't actually remember how much I paid, but it was probably around $30-ish for the yarn. I used my basic vanilla sock recipe, so I knit them cuff down one at a time on size 0 or 2 millimeter needles. I started with a German twisted cast on, knit 2x2 rib, did a stockinette leg, did a heel flap and gusset with an eye of partridge heel, and then I ended with a wedge toe and closed it off with grafting. Now the reason I wanted to make these is because I was reading online that it was a trend to have brightly colored socks, like a fun pop of color with your outfit. You know, something like red or green. So I decided to pull out this really bright royal blue from my stash. Now, because this is a merino cashmere nylon blend, it's not going to wear super well, but I literally have like over 50 pairs of socks, and so I think it's going to last a while just based on the fact that I'm not going to wear them that much. But ideally, this is not great to use as an actual sock yarn in my opinion. It is very soft, and I think they're going to be nice and warm. And I'm picturing wearing them with some loafers and just having that fun pop of color. And I enjoyed this so much that I'm actually working on another bright pair of socks right now. So I don't have a whole lot to say about these, but they were a quick, easy project. And I always love making socks. It's one of my very favorite projects to knit. I've been working on my winter sewing plans, but I took a little detour because I found that I needed to make some headbands to use when I work out. My hair has gotten long enough that I can pull it back into a ponytail when I do a workout, but the front pieces still kind of fall out and they get in my face and it's all sweaty and gross. So I just wanted to make a few headbands to help keep my hair in place and make my workouts a little bit more pleasant. And my secondary motivation is I'm trying to do a better job this year of using up the scraps that are in my stash. So I found a free tutorial online from Threads Monthly, and you do have to sign up for their newsletter, but the pattern you can download for free and the instructions are on a blog post, and I'll link it down in the description box. And this was a very, very simple tutorial. It just takes a little bit of 1-inch elastic and some jersey scraps. And the thing that really appealed to me about this particular tutorial is that it did not require any hand stitching. So I ended up making 7 headbands, which is more than I originally intended to. I thought I would make maybe 4 or 5, but I was just having such a good time going through my scraps and pulling out like, oh, this one would work and this one would work. So I ended up making 7, which is fine. I'm sure I'll use them all. And I was able to complete this project in a couple of hours. I made 1 first as a test, and then once I had that made, I cut out the other 6 and then sewed those all in tandem like assembly line style. So in total, it probably took me a maximum of 2 hours to make all 7. And then I'm gonna say that the project cost for this was free because I did use scraps and a free pattern, and I used a small piece of elastic for each one, but that price was negligible. So we're gonna go ahead and say that this project was free. Now, I normally don't enjoy doing things in multiples assembly line style, but this was so quick and easy and simple that it really wasn't that bad. And I did wear one of these headbands the other day for a workout, and it did its job, so I'm very pleased with how that worked out. And I would certainly think about making more of these in the future because it is such a good use of scraps, and it's a good thing that you could make up quick gifts if you needed to. So I highly recommend the tutorial, and if you enjoy making this sort of thing, it's very, very simple and easy. So give it a try if you're looking to add some headbands to your wardrobe. This next make, I'm really not quite sure how I feel about it, but we'll get to that. The pattern is the JoliLab Hazel. I made a size 36, and for alterations, I did a broad back adjustment and I shortened the sleeves by 2.5 inches. The fabric that I used was a 4-ounce 100% cotton denim that I got from Joann Fabrics last year. It took me 8 days from start to finish, and the project cost was about $44, and that includes the pattern, the fabric, and a $5 cushion. So JoliLab is a French company, and they do include English in their instructions, but basically what happens is they have the instructions written in French, and then there's an English translation underneath those instructions. And I think for this particular pattern, a few things might have gotten lost. Now, caveat, I'm really terrible at following instructions. I don't know why, but I skip things all the time or I don't read things carefully, so this could be my error, but I did comb over them several times, and I'm pretty sure that at least in the English instructions, they never actually tell you to stitch down the button plackets. And then there were a few other things that I had a little bit of trouble understanding what they meant, and so some of the construction, I just did it on my own, but I've made a lot of shirts before, and so it wasn't really that big of a deal. Except when I got to the very, very end of the project when it was just time to put on the buttons and buttonholes. And I realized that I had made a mistake way back at the very beginning of the project. And this was totally my own fault. I'm not going to blame the instructions. But long story short, I made the button placket way too narrow. So when it was time to put on the buttonholes, I realized that I was not going to be able to put a buttonhole on such a narrow placket. And then one of those things that you realize in retrospect, I started looking at the collar band and it looked a little bit wavy. And it made a lot of sense then that, oh yeah, I kind of had to stretch out the collar band to fit the shirt because the shirt was actually supposed to be narrower than it really was because I hadn't done the button placket correctly. So since I had completed the entire thing except for the button placket, I would have had to unpick a lot of things to fix it. So I decided to just cross my fingers and hope for the best, and I ended up stitching the buttonholes and the buttons on just a single layer of fabric, which I know is not a good idea. I understand that, but I just didn't feel like going back and fixing it, so that's what I did, and hopefully it'll be okay. Now in terms of other changes that I made, there's a couple of different options for this elasticized sleeve cuff. One of them is to use elastic thread and do shirring, which I didn't really want to do. And the other one is to stitch a piece of elastic directly to the sleeve. And I didn't want to do that because I don't like how that would feel against my skin. So I added a piece of bias tape and just did an elastic casing instead. And I really like the way that that worked out a lot better than just stitching the elastic directly to the sleeve. And because it was a curved hem, I also went ahead and finished the bottom hem with bias tape rather than folding it up twice and stitching it down. I also hand stitched the interior of the collar band to the inside instead of machine stitching it. I just think it's a little bit of a cleaner finish that way. I think those were all of the changes that I made to the instructions. As far as the fit goes, I think that the fit is pretty good. I do think that the sleeve is maybe just slightly too long. Maybe next time I would shorten it by like ½ inch. And I also think that the body length on me is a little bit longer than I would prefer, but it's not terrible. Next time I'd probably just take an inch off the body just for personal preference. Now the reason I'm feeling a little bit unsure about this make and whether I like it or not is I don't know if I like the way that it looks. I think some of it is that this ruffle is pretty tall and I have a short neck, so I don't really know if that looks good on me or not. Also, the ruffle isn't lined, and I kind of had this nagging feeling in the back of my brain, and I was asking myself, like, should I line the ruffle? But then I was like, well, the instructions don't tell you to. So I didn't line it. But of course, when you wear the shirt, you can see the underside of the ruffle. So I really do wish that I had just cut to and lined it instead of hemming it. That's kind of a personal preference thing. I think the main issue that I have with the style of this is my fabric choice. It's not a heavy fabric by any means, but it is a little bit of a sturdier cotton. And so the shirt kind of sticks out a little bit from the body because that's just how the fabric works. In a drapier fabric, I think maybe it would have flowed over the body a little bit better. But on the other hand, I wouldn't have really wanted to use a super flimsy rayon because I think that that wouldn't hold up the collar like it needs to be held up. So I'm actually a little bit unsure of what fabric choice would be right for this top. Maybe something like a cotton lawn that's a little bit lighter than this, but a little bit more sturdy than like a rayon challis. But at any rate, I think some of my discomfort is the fact that it does like billow out so much, and the femininity of the ruffled sleeves and the ruffle at the collar. I just don't really know if it feels like me. Now, having said that, I actually have another blouse from JoliLab that I made. That one was called the agate blouse. And when I finished it, it was also in a little bit of a more sturdy cotton. I basically felt the exact same way. I wasn't sure if it was too billowy, I didn't really like the ruffle, and I will say that over time, having worn that shirt, it's grown on me. So it's not my favorite, I'm not pulling it out of the closet to wear every week, but I do like it, and it's a little bit of something as a change up, and maybe I'll feel the exact same way about this one. I have not had an opportunity to actually wear this top, I've only put it on for photos. So I think I need to wear it a few times and style it a few different ways and see if it will grow on me just like the other one did. But for now, I don't quite love it as much as I thought I was going to. The design of this top really reminds me of Cezanne, so in my head, I was convinced I was gonna love it and was gonna make all these different versions. But for now, I feel like I'm just gonna stick with this one and wear it a few times and see if it grows on me before I rush out and make a bunch more. Because right now, I just don't quite know if I like the way that it looks on me or if it's my style. Let me know if you have any suggestions for when you're feeling unsure about a project and how you ultimately end up deciding whether the style is for you or whether it isn't. I would love to hear your feedback in the comments. This project was part of my winter plans list. I wanted to make a hooded scarf, and it was part of my Minerva brand ambassador partnership, so I did receive the fabric for free. The pattern that I ended up using was from Keechiibstyle. It's a free pattern that is on the Olfa blog, and I will link it down in the description box. So for all intents and purposes, this project was free because I did receive the fabric from Minerva and the pattern was free. So I'm going to say the cost was $0 and I made it in just one day. Now the reason why I switched the pattern from what I was originally going to use is because I wanted to take part in the BHM Pattern Designers Challenge being run by Natita of So Natural Dane, and Keechiibstyle is a Black pattern designer. So when I saw that this pattern had been released on the Olfa blog for free, I went ahead and downloaded it because it was just like what I was looking for and it looked really easy to put together. Now I did have a few issues with the pattern. First of all, it's one of those that you have to print out and tape together. There is no AO print, which is fine with me. I never use those anyway. But the issue was that when you're printing out the pattern, there's actually, I think, 3 blank pages that have nothing on it. And it's not like there's different sizes. So that was just a little bit irritating to me because it's a waste of paper. But in the grand scheme of things, not a huge deal. The other thing that I had an issue with the instructions is that it doesn't tell you clearly up front what the seam allowances are, at least not that I could tell. It does eventually tell you to use a 3/8 inch seam allowance, but it's not actually until like step 4 or something. So I just think that it would have been better if they had put that at the top so it was nice and easy to see, or even better, put it on the pattern piece. I pretty much always go in and handwrite what the seam allowances are on my pattern pieces if they're not there, because if I wanted to go make this pattern in the future, I could just get out the pattern pieces, see what the seam allowances are, and I wouldn't even have to look up the instructions because it's so simple to put together. So doubtful that any pattern designers are out there listening to me, but just in case you are, it's a really good idea to mark your seam allowances on the actual pattern pieces. It makes it a lot easier for all of us. And then there was one more issue that I wanted to point out. Because of the shape of the pattern piece, it's almost kind of like an L shape where you have the hood and then the scarf extends out to the side. It is a little bit difficult to put your pattern piece on the fabric and keep it on grain. I found that for both my lining fabric and my main fabric, I had to tilt it ever so slightly to get it to fit on the piece of fabric. Because it's a scarf, I don't think it makes a huge deal if it's not perfectly on grain, but just be aware of that. It is a little bit tricky to get it lined up correctly. But besides that, it was super, super easy to put together, very, very fast. The pattern actually calls for knit fabrics while I used wovens, but I don't think that made any difference at all to the fit. This faux fur fabric was actually not what I was expecting. I've run into the issue with Minerva before that I guess I just don't read the description clearly enough, and so sometimes I get the fabric in the mail and it's sort of a surprise, and this was one of those. I thought that this fabric was going to be like an actual faux fur type fabric with like a deep pile. This, I would say, is much more like a velour fabric. I mean, I guess it does have a pile, but it's really, really thin. And it's on a knit backing, but it doesn't really have any stretch. So I would still say that I haven't really ever worked with faux fur before because I don't think this quite counts. But on the plus side, it was super easy to cut and sew, and there was barely any shedding, so that was definitely a positive. And the fabric absolutely still works for what I wanted it for, and so I'm not unhappy with that at all. This viscose satin for the lining, I've worked with that in the past, so I was used to that. It's really, really nice fabric, very high quality, and it feels super nice and soft against the skin. Now, when I took my outdoor photos for Instagram, it was actually very cold on that day. I think it was in the 20s, and I was a little bit concerned about not wearing a hat because normally I would wear a hat, but because I was taking photographs, I didn't want the hat to distract from the scarf. And happily, I can report that it kept my head nice and warm. It was surprisingly warmer than I thought it was going to be. So I do think that this is going to be extremely functional. I've been lucky so far that February has been weirdly warm, so I haven't actually needed to wear this scarf yet because it hasn't been raining or snowing. But I do know that that weather is going to come back around right around the corner, and so I'm happy to have this scarf in my closet. I do love the giraffe print. I think that it looks really sophisticated and chic for an animal print. So I could not be happier with this project. I think that it worked out wonderfully. I like the drafting and the shape of the hood. It's nice and round, it's not pointy. And I think that it looks really elegant and sophisticated in addition to being warm. The next item I'd like to talk about is the Nielsen Flint shorts. This was part of my winter sewing plans. I wanted to make myself a pair of black faux leather shorts. This project took me 6 days from start to finish, and the cost was about $32 for the pattern and the fabric, plus a little bit of a cushion. Now for sizing, I printed out the size 6 at the waist and graded to a 4 at the hip. But then I did end up adding an additional inch to the waist because I thought that I had initially printed the wrong size and I just didn't want to reprint it. So really I did more of like the size 8 at the waist, grading to a 4 at the hip. I shortened the legs by 1 inch. And I also shortened the center back rise by 1 inch, and I added 1.5 inches to the front thigh. But those were the only fit adjustments that I made. I did make a muslin out of this old bed sheet that I had lying around because although I have sewn this pattern once before, it didn't fit me the best and I had actually trashed that initial pattern, so I had to reprint and start over again. I just wanted to make sure that it was going to be a good fit before I cut into my expensive faux leather. So I made all of my pattern adjustments before I sewed this muslin and then I tried it on. The only thing about this muslin that didn't fit well was the waistband. It was a little bit too big. However, I decided not to alter the pattern because I didn't interface the waistband, so it's just this thin cotton, and I kind of assumed that maybe it had stretched out a little bit and that the faux leather was going to be less flexible. So I went ahead and just kept it as is and cut it out of my faux leather fabric. Now the fabric is from Emma One Sock and I bought it a couple of years ago. It's a viscose backed faux leather. And it took me so long to use it because I had just psyched myself out that it was going to be so difficult to sew with faux leather. I've never done it before, but it was surprisingly a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. I ended up using a press cloth to press all of my seams open. I didn't worry about finishing the edges because I knew that they weren't going to fray. And I used a little bit of a scrap of some leftover black lining fabric to line the pockets. I was just super careful when I was pressing to make sure that I wasn't touching the fabric with my iron, so nothing melted. It didn't change the texture. It actually held a crease reasonably well, I would say. And then for the sewing settings, I used a size 70 microtex needle and a little bit of a longer stitch length than I would normally use. I think I used a 3mm instead of 2.5. But yeah, I was really quite surprised at how simple and straightforward it was to put together. The construction of these shorts is super easy. I did make a design change. I added belt loops, and I'm really glad that I did that, and I'll tell you why in a second. And then instead of doing the button closures, because I was a little bit scared about doing buttonholes in this fabric, I just did 2 hook and bar closures, and I think that that worked out great. Now, as far as changes that I would make if I had it to do over again, I should have shortened the pocket bags a little bit because I shortened the legs of the shorts. The pocket bags actually ended up kind of getting caught in the hem because you make a really deep hem, it's like 2.5 inches. And I had to put the pocket bags in the hem or otherwise they would show below the shorts. So I definitely probably should have gone back and shortened the pockets a little bit, but it worked out okay. Now, the reason I'm really glad that I added belt loops is because in the end, the waist of the shorts did turn out to be a little bit too big. Instead of adding a full inch to that size 6, I think I would have been better off adding a 1/2 inch instead. Because even with interfacing the waistband and it's a little bit of a thicker fabric that's not super stretchy, it is a little bit loose. But as long as I wear it with a belt, I think it actually looks fine, it works fine. And it's also helpful if I tuck in my shirt, if it's a little bit of a thicker, heavier shirt, that also helps to take up that extra space so that my shorts aren't going to fall down or anything. So now that I've made these shorts, in my initial plans video, I had explained that I've never worn shorts in the winter time, but I wanted it as an alternative to a mini skirt that would be a little bit more comfortable. And now that I have these shorts, I'm super excited about all the different ways that I can style them. I just think that there's a lot of potential there for layering it with a sweater, or doing a simple t-shirt or a turtleneck, or even something like a pretty blouse and a jacket. There's just so many distinct possibilities. I did wear these yesterday and they were pretty comfortable. One thing I will say is that the fabric does wrinkle, unfortunately. Like when I was frequently sitting down and getting back up again, especially in the back, there were a lot of wrinkles. I'm guessing it's perhaps because it's a viscose backing. So that might be why it's a little bit more likely to crease. That's just a guess. I'm not an expert or anything. And because it is a faux leather, it's not something that I'm gonna wanna iron constantly. So it's just one of those things that I think I'm gonna have to live with it. It's not my favorite, but it's not gonna keep me from wearing the shorts. Now, I did wear these on a cold winter day and I had them on with tights, and when I went outside to walk the dog, I wore a long coat over it, and it was just like wearing a dress or a skirt. Like, I didn't notice any sort of draft or anything like that. So I think it was perfectly comfortable to wear in the wintertime. And because the faux leather that I used is a little bit on the thinner side, I mean, we'll have to see what happens when the weather warms up, but I kind of think that now that I've made it, I'll be able to wear these for a longer part of the year than I had initially thought that I would. I think I could probably wear these in 3 seasons, not in the middle of summer when it's super hot, but the rest of the time, I think that I could wear them fairly comfortably. So I think that this was a really good addition to my wardrobe, and like I said, I'm so excited to come up with all different ways to style it. So this one gets a big thumbs up in my book. I'm very, very happy with how it came out. The sweater that I'm wearing is called the Anyday Sweatshirt, and it's by Ysolda Teague. The project cost for this was about $70, and that includes the price of the fabric, not the fabric, the yarn and the pattern, and a $5 cushion. And it took me around 50 days to knit this sweater. I started it a little bit before Christmas. The yarn that I used is called Valley Yarns Worthington. It is a wool, alpaca, and viscose blend. I made a size 2, and I used size 3 and size 5 bamboo interchangeable needles from my Haya Haya set. I was really pleased that I knit this sweater and I had a little bit less than half a skein of yarn left, so the yarn requirements that are listed in the instructions are pretty accurate. Usually with knitting patterns, they often overestimate how much yarn you actually need, and sometimes you'll end up with a full skein or more left over, but this one was pretty spot on. I was really pleased with that. When it comes to modifications, I shortened the body 1 inch just to suit my personal preferences, and I had to shorten the sleeves. And to be honest, when I got to the sleeves, that was the last part of the sweater that I was knitting. I pretty much stopped looking at the instructions after I did the underarm decreases because I knew that I would need to recalculate the rate of decrease because my arms are so short. So I just winged it from then on out. And so I think as a result, my sleeves are a little bit wider than the pattern intends them to be. But I actually wanted it this way because I've seen a lot of ready-to-wear sweaters lately that have a little bit of a looser cuff, not quite a bell sleeve, but just not tight to the wrist. And I really liked that look. I am really impressed with the instructions for this pattern. So it's a basic sweatshirt style pattern. It's oversized, it has a round neck. It has this little sweatshirt detail here. The pattern's very easy to follow. It includes bust shaping if you have a larger cup size. I didn't need that, so I didn't use those instructions, but they are available. There's different heights for regular or tall. There's just a lot of options for customization, and it has a really, really wide size range. Now, I do admit that I got a little bit bored working on this sweater. Typically, a sweater in a worsted weight yarn would take me around a month to knit, and that's probably the actual amount of knitting time that it took, because I definitely remember putting it down for maybe 2.5 to 3 weeks, somewhere in there, that I just didn't feel like working on it at all. It had nothing to do with the pattern, it's just that sometimes I get a little bit bored with plain stockinette and I just wanted to work on other projects. Now, I've been knitting for a long time and I've knit a lot of sweaters. I don't know if I've ever knit the exact same sweater pattern more than once. I might have because it's been a really long time and maybe I just forgot. But I will say it's extremely rare for me to want to knit the same sweater pattern again because there's just so many patterns out there in the world that I haven't tried yet. But this one, I love it so much that I would genuinely consider knitting another one in the future. It's just the perfect sweater for me. It's oversized, but it's not super baggy. It has some really clever shaping so that there's not too much bulk under the arms. It's not your typical drop shoulder sweater. There is some sleeve cap shaping. And then as I said earlier, there's an underarm gusset to kind of remove that extra bunchy fabric that's right under the arms. I think it would be really fun to have another one in a bright pop of color, but I absolutely love this tweedy neutral. I think this charcoal gray is going to go with so many things in my wardrobe. Now, the yarn wasn't the most pleasant to work with because it's a little bit fragile. It's fairly loosely spun, so it comes apart easily, and it had a ton of vegetable matter in it, so I was constantly having to stop and try to remove those prickly bits. I didn't succeed in getting it all out, and so I cannot wear the sweater on its own. I have to wear a t-shirt underneath because it's way too prickly and itchy to wear it on its own. I don't really mind that. I pretty much never wear my sweaters without a t-shirt underneath. I just think it helps to keep them a little bit cleaner when you don't have skin contact. Normally, I only launder my sweaters like once a season, like at the end of the season before I put them in storage. I'll wash all my sweaters and then put them away. And if I'm not wearing them like up against my skin, I feel like they don't get that dirty unless I spill something on them. So the prickliness doesn't really bother me too much, but just a word of warning, I would not buy this yarn with the intention of wearing it next to your skin. But I do really love the way that it looks, and because it has alpaca in it, I just feel like over time it's gonna get this nice fuzzy halo. It'll be even more textured. So I'm pretty happy with my yarn choice. I might not gravitate towards using this yarn again, but for this project, I think it worked out fine. So I really love this sweater. Even though it wasn't the most exciting sweater to knit, I do think it's maybe one of my favorite sweaters that I've ever made, and I just love it, and I can't wait to wear it again and again for many, many years in the future. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you want to see even more of my winter mix, watch this one next.